So here you will see the link to those recordings on the home page of Twen. It will take me a day to get them up, so today's class will be up through this link tomorrow. It's basically just a link to my very own YouTube channel. So this way you can refer back should you need to miss a class, or as you start to do assignments and know that we discussed it way back 2 classes ago and can't remember and whatever. So hopefully you will find those useful. I know that some of the students last year did. Okay. Also, I had a couple of questions on the screencasts as well as the extra credit, and a couple of people were concerned about what if they got a question wrong. Don't worry about it. For the screencasts, for the extra credit, go through it, give it your best effort. If you've done it, you get full credit. So give it a try. Also, I will say about the screencasts, those of you who asked a question at the end, they were all great questions. I will be answering them either as we go through the class today and next time. And then what I will do is I keep track of those questions, and at the end of the section next time, because we'll be finishing up secondary sources, I will go through your questions and make sure that I answer any of those that I've missed, and definitely keep me honest. If I don't answer your questions, by all means, please ask them. All great questions. Keep them coming, by the way. Okay, so what we are doing today is we are going to start with a workshop, which means we are going to divide up into groups and head down to the library to do a workshop essentially on sort of a combination workshop on using encyclopedias and also using indexes. Now, we'll be using the print index because someday you may still have to use a print index, although honestly, when you encounter an index online, it's going to work pretty much the same way the print does. So you want to know how to navigate your way around those indexes. So we'll be using the encyclopedia indexes, although the indexes pretty much work the same whatever type of resource you'll be using. So what we will be doing is I will divide you up into groups. Why don't I just do that now while we're talking about it? So we're going to be looking in the indexes to ALR, American Law Reports, New York jurisprudence. Remember the jurisprudence in the encyclopedias. ALR is kind of that hybrid, sort of encyclopedia, but a little more in depth. So New York Jur, AmJur, American jurisprudence, CJS. And because we're a nice big group, we get to encounter yet a different resource, something called proof of facts. And I'll go into a little bit more detail. So we'll divide up into groups. I'm going to ask each group to research our class issue. Now, just as a reminder, and for our new folks, we did an issue spotting, which is getting sort of cut off on the screen, unfortunately. There's not much I can do about that, is there? See if there's a scroll here. There we go. So, yeah, I got a little cut off. So our issue regarding our client who has health coverage through an HMO and wanted to go to see a specialist and basically was told by the HMO, we're not going to cover that. And the specialist was a cardiologist. She had a heart attack 6 months later, and now she wants to sue her HMO for denying coverage. And so we sat down and thought about our issue, because before you put finger to keyboard or hand to book, you need to figure out what words to either type in or look up, right? So we thought about who, we thought about where, when, what, why. And then we thought about the broader areas that our issue may come under. So my question to you was, what law school class might you discuss this issue in? And we came up with a great list: torts, insurance, healthcare, contracts, employment / labor law. Okay. So we're going to divide up into the groups of the resources I just mentioned. I think for expedience's sake, I'm just going to count through. If you want to switch groups or whatever, just wind up being there are 21 of us. There are 5 resources, so there'll be 4 per group, except one group will have 5 people. So why don't we just do that now? So ALR, Rafi, Crystal. It's a good opportunity for me to practice your name. Rafi, Crystal, Matt, Ali, and Danielle. So you're going to look in ALR, American Law Reports. Okay. Group number 2, you're going to look in New York Jury, and you're going to have to remember which groups, because once you move from your seats, I won't remember which group's which. Okay, so group number 2, Aman, Eric, Brandon, Avery, and Chelsea. You're going to look in New York jurisprudence. Group number 3, you're going to look in American jurisprudence. So that's going to be Ida, Jessica, George, Shane, and Jessica, right? We've got 2 Jessica. That's going to mess me up for sure. Okay, 2 Jessicas. Okay, you're AmJur, American jurisprudence. Okay. Oh, I divided it up wrong, didn't I? Because I have too many groups for 5. When I do that, just wave your hand and say, hey. Okay, so why don't we keep group 1 with 5 people, and then group 2, stop with Avery, your New York juror. Chelsea, 1, 2, 3, 4, with Ida, Jessica, and George. Group 4, Shane, Jessica, Paul, and Liana. You're going to look in CJS, Corpus Juris Secundum. And group 5, you get the proof of facts. A little bit different. Erica, Denise, Victoria, and Victoria. I have all the same names together. Okay, now let me warn you. Some of the groups are going to find something good, or at least you should. Some of the groups aren't. And the reason for that is not to give you an exercise in frustration, but to emphasize the fact that on any given issue, some resources are good and some resources are not going to be so good. And obviously, it could be good for one issue and not so great on another issue. Okay, so remember last time we did a Google search, and our Google search was something along the lines of, we typed in HMO and denial of coverage. So what are some of the other terms, in addition to those terms, what are some of the other terms we might look in the index? Because whenever you're doing research, typing, looking in an index, you want to be flexible, because obviously your first search may not be the best one. Well, what are we worried about? Our client wants to do what? What's the bottom line here? It's the key. Pardon me? Is that what she wants to do? She wants to sue to do what? For money? She wants to sue whom? Or what? An HMO? For negligence? Denial of coverage. Another word for negligence, we decided we have a couple of different words here for negligence. That one's kind of hard, but we have that says duty or standard of care and liability. So where do you think is the best place to start? And then you can, since you're all in different resources, you'll want to go in different directions, possibly. What's sort of the most unique factor about it? Negligence isn't really unique, right? You look in the index or you type in negligence, you're going to get a gazillion results. HMO. Now that is a technique for research that sometimes works. Sometimes you're going to need to start in negligence and work your way down. But if you have a unique factor and you know for sure, and this is what I mean about the key concept, you know for sure whatever you want to do, this is an HMO. Now, there are other ways of referring to the HMO that you might learn about or think about, but you at least want to start there and see it. That works. We're all good with the starting place. We're all good with where our various resources, and again, I'm going to ask you to remember them, because now that I've divided you up, once you move, let's see if, so what I'm going to ask you to do is see what you can find within your resource that might address it. It might not necessarily give you the answer, but hopefully it will address. I'm going to ask each group to bring up whatever volumes of the index and volumes of the actual set. If you do find something that seems like it's good, I'm going to ask you to bring that up. I have a cart waiting downstairs for us, so you can put that on there. And then we're going to come up in each group. I want each group to explain briefly the process they went through to either find the good resource they found, or explain the process and that they just tried this, and it didn't work, if that's what happens. And as I said, you may encounter that with a couple of these resources. All set? Let's go down. I'm going to pause our recording. I'm so happy to remember. All right then, so let's chat about what we've found. Now, obviously, this is quite artificial in that very limited amount of time. Although, good idea to keep in mind, whatever you're looking through, if you're not finding anything good, don't waste a lot of time. I was chatting with for somebody that part of being efficient, and remember that's one of our goals, is to realize when something isn't going to help you because you don't want to waste a lot of time. Okay, so let's start with our ALR group. What did you find? And I have your volumes here.
It's the direction.
So what was the best result you found, and then tell us how you found it.
Yeah.
So the best result we found was we actually began our search in a quick index ALR,
The red one.
which we learned that's not really the way to go because quick index is limited in how much information it has, and the larger regular ALR index will have more information. But we were able to find in the H volume of that index liability for third-party healthcare payors, and that led us to another ALR 5, volume 56, and we opened that up, and there was a nice summary at the beginning, which basically said that a patient alleging an injury due to the denial of coverage can sue an HMO, but their odds of winning are very slight, and that's a very heavy burden to carry.
Okay, and were you able to look at it in depth any further?
Well, we kind of just took it from here. There is some case law in there, but obviously if we were looking at the ALR, couldn't examine that. But we went into the ALR and also looked up ERISA, because we remember from last class that ERISA came into play. So we went to, sorry, I'm just trying to that was the 12, the oldest one. Did we bring that? That one should be. Oh, this doesn't have the summary. I think they're another. Yeah, I think we might have gone back. But we went to another ALR to look at ERISA, but we really didn't get that deep into ERISA yet.
Okay, so anybody else run into ERISA? And you folks were looking in New York Jur. And what did you find in New York Jur? Here are your volumes. If you could pass this down. Should have two.
So we looked at the index under health maintenance, and we got our key words. Since you forgot. The malpractice. We're just not sure which section. Well, what it said was that the ERISA might bar claims So then we determined that we should look into ERISA, which we didn't really get into.
Okay, fair enough. And in the index, so you looked under health maintenance organization. Do you remember what the next sub
Malpractice.
malpractice? And what made you think of malpractice?
Just the fact that it seems like the HMO had a duty for the patient.
Okay, so and maybe not alternate theory to negligence, because malpractice is negligence, but a more narrowly defined expression of the negligence theory. And so you thought of malpractice. Did it just come to your head, or?
We just saw it in the list of under health maintenance organizations. So I thought it was relevant.
So if I could steal that index, see if I can do this without too much fuss, so you can all see what we're talking about. I was chatting with one group, I think it was the New York Juror group. What I'm going to try to do here is switch to the document camera. Again, with technology. Oh, look at that. Now the only problem is I can't see it from back there. So let's see where we are. So here's health maintenance organization. Do you see malpractice? So we see malpractice. You see my finger. You all see it?
Yep.
Okay, so one advantage to using an index, again, print online, it doesn't matter, is you may not be thinking of all of the relevant terms or terminology. We had thought about negligence, remember, when we did our issue spotting? I don't think we mentioned malpractice, did we? But now that you think about it, right? I mean, you think about malpractice in doctors, or heaven forbid, lawyers. We don't want to say that too loud. But you may not have occurred to you. So the advantage of the index, again, because you have to put your finger to keyboard to type in words or look at the index. The advantage of the index is it gives you some suggestions. So again, when you're totally with a new issue and you really just don't even know what to type in, you might be better off starting with some help with an index, for instance. So in looking under health maintenance organizations, because that we already knew, our New York Juror group discovered, oh look, malpractice, that could be interesting. Let's look under that, and it turned out that it was interesting. And I'll talk about getting into ALR and New York Juror and these other resources online in just a little while, so if you're wondering about that, it will be coming. Okay, so let me back up just a second because I wanted to do this. Backing up to the ALR group. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 totally useless, 5 totally awesome, where would you rate ALR? 4? Okay, 4 or 5. New York Juror, 1 totally useless, 5 totally awesome. Also 4. Okay, let's move on to AmJur. And AmJur, folks, you looked under the H index, right?
The H and the I.
Okay, so I'm going to put it up here in the document camera now that I've got it up and working. So under H, you looked under health maintenance, or what exactly?
I think health insurance.
Health insurance. And is that because you thought that was better than health maintenance, or?
When we looked for HMO, it led us to Social Security and Medicare. You had said that our client is under 65, so that would apply.
Okay, fair enough. So Medicare applies only to people not only over 65, but no longer covered by other insurance. So when you retire, if you're lucky and Medicare is still around, that would apply, but not until then. Okay, so under health insurance, what did you look under?
We looked under penalties for the insurer not providing benefits, but we suggested that would occur later down the line, not at this stage. I think
I mean, I was looking through both pages, and a lot of it was just health code violations. So I was in trouble finding things in that book. Then I found something having to do with damages that was more focused on an insurer, not handling a claim. More like a loss oriented.
Okay. So basically, you found things that were at best tangentially related. Am I summarizing that?
Yeah, there's nothing that was really on point.
Okay.
What we were looking for.
So on a scale of 1 to 5, totally wasted time, totally awesome.
Like
2. And what did you say, Chelsea?
Like wasted time.
0.5. Okay. So somewhere between 0.5 and 2.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you saying a source within Andrew or a source just somewhere in the world?
I guess like the past two were more helpful on finding. Like here.
Well, certainly based on the ratings of 4 or 5 to 0.5-ish to 2. Okay. Let's move on to CJS. Where's my CJS group sort of? So, how did you do? Did you find something? No.
We didn't find much.
Okay.
We looked under a couple different search terms. We looked for, health insurance. We looked for medical malpractice. We looked for HMO, but there was nothing. We managed to find some books that talk about health insurance and medical malpractice, but they're not really specific to the issue at hand. So I don't think that this source was particularly helpful.
Okay. And New York Juror and ALR, would you say that what you found was specific to the issue at hand? I like that phrase. Okay. Did you notice anything else about CJS in the books? Jessica, Shane, you've got the index right there. Is there anything you noticed about that? What's it say on the spine? Okay, what else?
Well, everything's listed alphabetically, and we use the general index to then find the specific quotes.
Last updated.
Last updated. 1014.
We looked at the updated index too.
Okay.
Nothing on health insurance.
Well, we got health insurance generally. Do you have the updated index with you, or? Because an updated index, it was probably updated. I'm sorry we didn't bring it up. Can't think of everything. It's probably only. Do you know when it was last updated? Did you notice?
But it seemed like it was more recent.
Actually, not necessarily. I mean, that is a fair guess, but not necessarily. Sometimes you'll have an update and this is the problem with books, and so there are lots of advantages to online. Sometimes an update will have been left on the shelf even though it was less recent than the main volume. I am belaboring this point for a reason. What you will see here is that, and here we are in the pocket part, right? So that's the most up-to-date in the volume, June 2014. Likewise, our last updated sticker on the spine, for those who didn't see it, actually you might just be able to see it regular old way, this yellow sticker, 2014. We had talked last time about one of the themes of the course, bibliographic awareness. Whatever source you're looking at, online, in print, you just want to know how up-to-date it is. One of the questions in this screencast was, how far back can we look? And I'm going to give you the typical lawyer answer, it depends. you can look back. I mean, you sometimes will have no choice but to look back in time. I think the example of whoever asked if they were looking at something from 2005, which obviously is way before 2016 or even 2014. And I'm not suggesting you don't look at something even that old or older. It could be your issue was last addressed in 1990. I once did research way back while the earth was still cooling, and I actually practiced law for a couple of years. One of the first assignments I had, it turned out the answer, the leading case for the issue I was researching was actually in the 1880s sometime. And the law just never changed. It had to do with promissory notes. So, they decided the law way back then, and it hadn't changed since. So we were citing to an 1880s case that was still good law. So the point being that there's no set time by which you, oh, look, that's 10 years old, forget it. But what you want to know, oh, that's 10 years old, let me see what it says, and then let me make sure there hasn't been anything more recent than that, which is what I had to do with the 1880s case. It's like, well, that's the best I can find. I better make darn sure there's nothing more recent because there's a lot of time in there to check. But that turned out to be what the ruling case was, the controlling case was at the time. So you want to be bibliographically aware and just know when your resource was last updated and how much updating you will have to do. Okay, last but not least, our proof of facts. Yep. And what did you find?
We started in that big book over there, the index.
The index.
We have it here.
Oh, you have the H index there. Okay.
Started in there, went to HML.
Okay. Managed to do that. Okay, and what did you find?
We just found different things. We found the denial coverage, and we found direct negligence.
What's the name of the best article?
Liability of HML.
So that seemed pretty much
On point.
on point. Yeah. Okay, and so I'll ask you guys CJS, but we kind of know the answer already. Scale of 1 to 5, totally useless, totally awesome.
This was actually pretty helpful.
Yeah.
This is like a 3.5.
3.5. Okay. Okay, so somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5. Okay, and CJS?
2.
Oh, you guys.
Probably 1.
I was going to say you're generous. I mean, you didn't find anything, but doesn't matter. I'm just kidding around. Okay. So you get the sense for this particular issue, there's some seemingly pretty good sources, and there's some, Amateur can be fine, CJS can be good. They weren't this go round. So proof of facts. So proof of facts I didn't discuss in the screencast so much, is a more practitioner-oriented set. We will be looking at proof of facts. We'll be spending a significant portion of a class toward the end of the semester looking at what proof of facts does for us. There's nothing to say that you can't start in a source like that, even though it gives you a whole lot of other stuff down the line. In fact, there's no real hard and fast rule where to start. Some of you remember our Google search and that we got some hints that way, and most of you are probably going to start there, which is totally fine, as I will keep on saying over and over, just don't stop there. Okay, I did want to mention one thing about index searching that I neglected to do, and I'm going to go back here to our ALR index, our New York JUR index, excuse me. And under New York JUR, we found health maintenance organizations and discovered that malpractice, you're all seeing malpractice? So we see the term malpractice, and then we see general discussion, malprac 115. Now, not surprisingly, our group, and I'm sure you all could guess, oh, that's the malpractice topic. Because remember, some resources are organized by topic, and then within each topic has a section number. If you couldn't figure out what malpractice stood for, what would you do? Now, yes, online you'll just have the link, so you don't have to worry about it, but if you are using the books for whatever reason, just about any book, any set of books, and not just legal, if they're using abbreviations, and especially indexes, in the beginning, they will have some sort, or sometimes it's at the end, but usually in the beginning, they will have a table of abbreviations. So if I didn't know what malpractice stood for, which obviously is unlikely, but you would just go to the beginning and discover that, let's see if I can get this on the screen. You all see that? So malpractice, surprise, surprise, means malpractice. So the point of that being, if you see an abbreviation in a set, I would look at the beginning first. If you go find the beginning, look at the end to see what the abbreviations stand for. Actually, other point, I lost our spot. So back here in Health Maintenance Organization, so under here, health insurance, and I'm not so interested in the substance, but the reference. So here under health insurance, can you see that? For detailed treatment, see index topic insurance. So what would you do? Yeah, get the I index. No trick questions, or very rarely trick questions, as I mentioned. So within an index, and again, this will be print indexes as well as online index, you will sometimes get references telling you, go look at some other part of the index. Sometimes you'll see generally, or just generally. There'll be all sorts of clues or terminology to move you to a different part of the index. And we'll be seeing that probably more as we look at treatises and their indexes. Okay, any questions so far on indexes and when the fact that some resources are sometimes going to be good and sometimes not so good? Okay, so what I would like to do is to take a brief look at this ALR article that Group 1 found. And you'll see I pulled it up on Westlaw, and again, we'll go over in a moment what they look like online, how to find them online. So if I had the citation on Westlaw, I would just type it in. Question? Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. There we go. Thanks. Okay, so I would type it in on Westlaw. So here we have, actually, Danielle kind of summarized this first highlighted portion. And what I've done, since we decided that this was a pretty good resource, is I've highlighted some of the portions. And let's take a quick look at ALR. ALR is a little bit, like I said, it's a bit of a hybrid, so it gives us this nice article outline. One of the questions I got in the screencast, which was a great question, was and this was more toward treatises or law review articles, but it applies to any resource. If I get a resource, how do I know it's going to be worthwhile without having to read the whole thing? And my answer to you is look at the table of contents, if there is one. Otherwise, see if there's a summary up front. For instance, in a law review article, there's not going to be a table of contents for the actual article or for anything. So then you have to hope that the summary up front gives you a sense. So here's the ALR outline. So we would take a look at that and see if that talks about what we're interested in. So, whoops, I'm going to try to scroll back up. So in real life, if you're researching this issue, you find a good resource, you're going to read it, right? So you're going to want to read it to see what you can find in terms of the answer, but you also want to read it to see what else is out there that I need to be thinking about, if anything. So here's our introduction. So in our introduction, it talks about underlying state negligent claim was preempted by federal law, particularly sections of the Federal Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA. And so you were interested in ERISA and very enterprisingly saw what else you could find in ALR having to do with ERISA. I was chatting with the New York juror group. I think, Aman, it was you. It's like, how do I learn about ERISA? And I asked you, well, what would you do? And what did you say? Good place to start. Again, you want to just find out what's going on. What is this ERISA thing? Google it. Careful if whatever your results are, very careful about citing, but even careful about relying. Remember, law firm sites you want to be very careful about, but it's fine to learn a little bit, even if you get Wikipedia. Remember our Wikiality with Mr. Colbert? Wikipedia, great to just get a general sense of what on earth is ERISA. Would be citing to Wikipedia for sure, but certainly I would be reading it. So let's scroll down a little bit, and as I'm reading, so summary and comment, so it's giving me a little background to ALR. It's telling me the rise of managed care delivery systems evolving over the last 20 years, saw runaway health crisis, etc., etc. I highlighted that because part of also what you want to be thinking about are what are the other ways of expressing my issue? Because if I need to continue to research this, maybe I'm not using the best terminology. And so managed care delivery systems. So we were talking about HMOs, right? But turns out HMOs are one type of managed care delivery system. So I might be looking out for, so now I know at least if I see a reference to managed care, I know, oh, that's relevant to me. I should be reading this. I shouldn't be saying, oh, that's not me, that's somebody else. Okay. And again, you'd be reading through this. I'm just showing you the highlights. So here it talks about a number of actions originally brought in state court have been preempted by federal law. Oh, bummer. Maybe we can't bring it into state court. Have to jot that down. Maybe we need to bring it to federal court, specifically by sections of ERISA. And then it goes on to say, if it contains a preemption, ERISA, that is, contains a preemption clause which provides that ERISA supersedes any and all state laws insofar as they may or not hereafter relate to any employee benefit plan. Now, typically you want to go to state court because typically you get better damages. I mean, you probably, did you talk about that in torts at all, or maybe a little bit? So anyway, so this is telling me, now this ERISA thing and this preemption by ERISA things turns out to be really important, because if I'm going to sue my client's HMO, I got to know where to start, right? I don't want to start in state court and then just find out it's preempted and then rack up all my time that's going to be a waste of time and her legal bills, and she's not going to be thrilled with me if I rack up legal bills in state court when I should have known I should have started in federal court. So I want to see what this is about, and sure enough, I get, just like good secondary sources are supposed to do, I get a cite to, anybody know what this is? Can you see that? You way down at the bottom, let me see if I can scroll. Footnote 7 says United States Code annotated. So I am getting source to a primary. We haven't talked about federal statute yet, so we'll in a couple of weeks. But hopefully most, if not all of you, remember from first year, USCA is United States Code annotated as the federal law's primary source. So definitely jotting that down on my pad. Primary sources to check. 29 USCA 1144 ERISA preemption. Oh, and by the way, several of you, again, asked great questions in the screencast about research log. I will answer those questions the best I can next class. So I haven't ignored them. We'll talk about them next class when I think it will be in better context. Okay. So we've learned some great things. We've learned terminology. We learned about this whole other preemption issue that we now have to worry about. Are we starting in state court? Are we starting in federal court because we're preempted by state court? We don't know yet. So that's we have to figure that out as well as research our main issue about whether we think our client can even sue in the first place. Okay, so that's investigating and learning from our research. Let's take a look at looking at secondary sources on our various online sources. We did the index in print. So actually, let's start in Lexis, just because, and I'm going to start back here in the beginning. And by the way, we all went down so you could see how to use the index. Not totally irrelevant to know how to use the materials in print. Why? Yes, ALR is online, AMDR is online, CJS is online, a whole bunch of treatises are online, but just earlier today, Lexis went down across the country. The I don't know what went wrong. So yes, they came back in a half an hour, so it wasn't a horrible thing. But if, something happened, I don't know, Professor Selby likes to talk about the zombie apocalypse. So for those of you Game of Thrones fans, if the White Walkers come and you can't get online anymore, having the books might not be a bad thing. Of course, if it's really the zombie apocalypse, I'm not sure you'll be headed to the library. Although maybe it's the same place, I don't know. Anyhow, so there are times when you may need the books for whatever reason. So here in Lexis Advance, now Lexis Advance is actually changing its front screen starting in March, and you'll start to see more of a browse screen like we'll see in Westlaw in just a couple of minutes. If all goes according to plan, I will be able to show you an example of that, not online, but in a brochure next week. But for now, there are a couple of different ways you would find secondary sources on Lexis Advance. Probably the most likely way you'll go is you'll run a search. So if I were to type in HMO liability, actually the results I would get would look like this. And all I would do is I would use the filters on the left, like an Amazon search. I mean, you've all been searching Lexis and Westlaw, so you know what these look like. So I'd use the filter. I know I want secondary materials because I know that's where I want to start because I don't know anything about HMO liability. I may or may not know to start with ERISA and preemption. And if I wanted to narrow further, well, actually, I would look at my results first. And so it turns out just secondary materials, interestingly enough, this first, liability of health maintenance organizations for negligence of member physicians. Does that sound good? Yes? No? Maybe? Sounds good? Yes? Excellent. We're not worried about our physician. We never quite read it to the physician, unfortunately. That's our whole problem. So we're not going to get sidetracked by that. Very good. And here, actually, liability, third-party healthcare payor. Again, more terminology we want to be aware of. It's actually, this is the article that our ALR group found. So sometimes just going through your results without narrowing further is perfectly fine. And then we scroll, here's more ALR. Oh, actually, I'm already narrowed. Sorry about that. Darn it. I saw your quizzical looks and thought. So, what happened was, because Lexis went down and then came back up, I'm thinking to myself, all right, if they go back down again, I want to be able to show you this, so I pre-did the search. And then, of course, I didn't undo the search. So, here is the search, not yet narrowed. So, what tends to happen with secondary source searches when you narrow to secondary materials is you get a lot of law reviews, which isn't a bad thing. We'll be talking about using law reviews and finding law reviews next week. But if you don't really want the law reviews because they tend to be very specific on a very narrow issue, then that's where you might want to narrow some. And on Lexis, as I had already done, I had narrowed jurisprudence. This is where you'll get both ALR and AMJUR. Actually, you won't find CJS on Lexis because CJS is owned by Westlaw. A couple of you had asked about narrowing secondary sources to a particular state. You do that here on Lexis under jurisdiction. And so that's one way to get to these materials on Lexis Advance. The other way, for now, until they change the screen as I described, will be under this Browse menu where you can go to Sources. And then you can either browse by jurisdiction or by category, or you can just search. And we'll go over this again when we talk about treatises. On Westlaw, question?
Could that kind of search be done on Bloomberg, or no? Because they don't have like keywords.
On Bloomberg, what kind of search are you talking?
Like the search that we're doing for Westlaw and Lexis Advance.
Okay, you won't find AMJUR or ALR on Bloomberg. You will find treatises and law reviews on Bloomberg. And no, you could just type in HMO liability, but Bloomberg does not have natural language. So Bloomberg would read that search as HMO and liability. So any document that had both those terms anywhere would get pulled up on Bloomberg. So not a great search on Bloomberg. We'll be looking at Bloomberg hopefully today. If we'll see how things go. I'm hoping to get to treatises today. We'll see what happens. If not, we will definitely talk about them next week. I've built in extra leeway next week because I know that this class may or may not get through everything originally planned. So when we will look at treatises on Bloomberg either today or next week. Back here on Westlaw Next. So here we see that browse menu for either jurisdiction, federal, state, or types of materials. So we could limit by secondary sources and go that way. Or just as we did on Lexis, we can throw in a search and narrow by type again, so secondary sources. And again, we see bar journals and law reviews tend to come up because there are just so many articles, so they tend to come up. Here's something Pennsylvania. So I'll take a look at a couple, but I will tend, especially when I know I want to search secondary sources, I will decide, okay, do I just need to start from scratch? Do I need to see if I can find an ALR article or encyclopedia, or do I want a treatise because I want something more in depth? And again, it depends on my knowledge. It depends on the issue. It depends on what the circumstances are of the particular issue in your place of business, in your law firm, and in your government, wherever you are. I know a couple of you mentioned that you're either working or had worked for law firms. Did you ever get you just need a quick and dirty answer, don't spend a lot of time? Have you ever gotten a dig deep, I really need to know the full breadth of what's going on with this issue? Those are two very different research projects. The quick and dirty, you might just be fine with Google, depending. And secondary source can help you with both, but obviously if it's the quick and dirty, you're not going to spend a whole lot of time trying to find that perfect ALR or jurisprudence. You might just check it quickly to see if it's something to get you where you need to go quickly or not. So here in secondary sources, again, I take a quick look, but typically I would narrow it a little bit. On Westlaw, I divide it up a little bit differently. So if I'm interested in ALR, I would check off ALR. As it turns out, you want to know, this lists some of the publication types. If you want to know all of them on Westlaw, you need to hit publication types and notice, then we finally see law reviews, which of course we know. And it turns out AmJur, the encyclopedias, would be in texts and treatises. So if I wanted to limit, I would also get treatises as well as AmJur. Or if I wanted to limit to particular publications, say I really just want to look at AmJur, or here's where I could limit, I really just want to look at New York Jur. And again, depending on my issue, see now with this issue, I wouldn't just limit to New York Jur because I'm already getting a sense, this has a federal component, right? I've learned about this federal statute, ERISA. I don't want to be limiting to just state materials. But if I knew it was just state, then I might just start New York Jur. In fact, a lot of times that's what I do when I know I need to know the New York law on. And I know it's typically a state issue, say a family law. That tends to be more state than federal, depending. So that's how I would limit on Westlaw. Any questions? Okay, they said I'm going to look at Bloomberg. Well, we will look at Bloomberg when we look at treatises. I'm not going to do it for AmJur or ALR because it's on Bloomberg. And actually, the other thing I wanted to show you, proof of facts. If we were to limit, one thing I should show you also on Westlaw, not my favorite features. So if I've chosen ALR and text and treatises, you'll notice I've put the check marks in, but nothing has happened. And you will see me forget to do this more than once this semester. You need to tell Westlaw to apply filters. Lexis just automatically gives you your choice. And so here you will see what. So here we see actually what our Proof of Facts group found the liability of health maintenance organizations. Okay, any questions? Let's take a break. We will be going to 7 today because there's a whole lot to cover, and as I said, I rather suspect we're not even going to get through it all today, but we'll do it next time. So we've got 5:23 Hofstra Standard Time, so let's come back in 10 minutes.
The mic's still on. Professor? The mic's still on in case you didn't know this.
So, as we suggested, getting started to get to know your issue, hopefully getting some leads, maybe finding out what other issues are out there, like ERISA and preemption. Google's a perfectly fine place to start. You then may want to go a little more targeted, at least not targeted from a legal standpoint, and check out an encyclopedia. ALR, I'm kind of throwing in the hopper with encyclopedias, even though it's slightly different. Again, you want to be flexible both in your terminology. You also want to be flexible in your research. Turns out ALR was great. You won't always find a great ALR. And ALR, of course, is wonderful because it gives you that nice outline and references to primary resources. Encyclopedias are also good, a little bit more basic. Again, sometimes they're going to be great. This time, Amger, CGS aren't so great. You'll find other resources we'll talk more in depth about, like Proof of Facts. There's another one called Causes of Action, and again, it's more practitioner-oriented. We'll look at these later in the semester. Next step you might want to take, and I say might not because it's not worth checking, but the order I'm giving you now isn't set in stone for any reason. If you're finding, maybe you just want to go to Amger first and forget about Google for whatever reason, that's fine too. So next we're going to talk about what we librarians call current development resources. What's going on today? Maybe you want to start in current development. So one type of issue that may be good to start in current development is something that gets talked a lot about in the news. You might want to start even in a general newspaper like New York Times, Wall Street Journal, or local paper if that seems relevant, Newsday, whatever. So an issue that gets talked a lot about in the general news. One issue, for example, that at least got talked a lot about a year or so ago, and you could obviously do search on Lexis Westlaw, search on Google for news, having to do, if you're researching capital gains, right? They're always talking about capital gains taxes in the news, or not always, but frequently. So if it is a particular issue in which is commonly discussed in the popular press, maybe that's a good place to start. Actually, in the capital gains issue, the New York Times and a couple of other, Wall Street Journal, another one, they're great places to start because they give you sort of what is capital gains and what are some of the issues and what you have to worry about if you were researching a tax issue. Another place, obviously we talked about Google search. We talked a little bit about, so you might encounter some newspapers. We talked about law review articles. You might also encounter some blogs. And again, blogs are typically going to be promotional for law firms or other organizations that are trying to show the world how great they are, which is perfectly fine. Again, you just want to be bibliographically aware of the website you're looking at. See who sponsors the blog. Another place another way of judging a website might be if it appears if it's recommended elsewhere. So an example would be here on the course website. I have a link for class web links. We're going to be looking at lots of different websites over the course of this semester. So most, if not all of those websites will be under this class web links if you want to get back to it. So we're now talking about secondary sources. So I'm going to click on that folder. And we're eventually trying to get to here. I'm going to open this in a new tab. The ABA, the American Bar Association, has a listing of what are called blogs. Get the play on words, B-L-A-W-G instead of B-L-O-G, anyway. And that's actually a common usage for law blogs. So you can find blogs on different areas through the ABA, and the reason I point this out, if you remember the ABA blog site, that's great, but just to get a sense of, if you do see a reference, that's going to give you a sense, all right, this site, even if it is a law firm site, is at least respected enough to be listed by the American Bar Association, so it's at least worth my while to take a look. And you might take a look at the different topics here, and see it's a health law topic. I might even just do our Control F, or I think on Mac says Command F, and see if there's anything listing ERISA, since we need to look into ERISA and preemption. So sure enough, it's under benefits, so I'm glad I did the Control F because I might not have thought to look there. And you can see a listing of, so again, if you remember the ABA has the site, great, or for whatever reason, if you get a reference, you just get a sense, okay, that's not a bad, that might be worth checking. A couple of other law blog reference sites, again, off of the list here, there's Law Prof blog. So this is a little bit different than the law firm blogs. Again, open this in a new tab. So law professors like to blog. So they can talk with each other across the country about their particular area. They aren't trying to sell anything, so that might be something that is more reliable. So if you do find a law professor blog on your area, again, I would try ERISA. I'm not sure there is one, so it doesn't look like there's one for ERISA. Maybe one for health. So here's health. And so here's the health blog. Again, it's going to be, I wouldn't read through the blog. Oh, I wonder if they're happening to talk about ERISA preemption or suing an HMO. That would be pretty random and take an awful lot of reading for possibly for no results. So I might either use a search, if there's a search mechanism to see if there's anything mentioned, or if I don't see a search, anybody know another good way to search? Remember from last time to search a website? Well, you could do the search box, but if you don't see this here.
No, I meant the top. You say you could search it in the site.
Okay, and how do I do that?
You go on Google, you type the website, and for the name of the website, you type in whatever you're searching for in the website.
Okay, so you type the word site, S-I-T-E, colon, then you have the web address, and after the web address, space, and whatever you want to search for. So if I were interested in ERISA, I have no idea if I'm going to find anything here. And sure enough, in this particular health law prof blog, this blogger, professor blogger, mentions ERISA. So yes, I could have used the search in this case because it was there, but you won't always find the nice little search there. So it's good to remember the site. Okay. Another way to find out more current developments, as I mentioned, actually, general news. One way we discovered last time, actually, I think it was Shane who discovered, were legal news papers. So yes, there's the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Washington Post and whatever other paper you like. Problem with those, they're not really going to focus on the legal issues, and they're only going to talk about the very popular ones. Legal newspapers, they're typically more locally oriented, may talk in more depth from a legal perspective, or may talk about an issue that just don't make it to the general news. And as we found with our question regarding suing fact versus opinion, and how to define that in New York, Shane followed his nose and found in the New York Law Journal. New York Law Journal is a legal newspaper that comes out every day in New York, well, Monday through Friday, and just it does a bunch of different things. It has articles about legal news in New York. It also has some talks about decisions that have come down in the various courts. I am here on Lexis because this is one area where Lexis and Westlaw differ significantly. These days, Lexis is much better for legal news, and that is because Lexis has an agreement with a major legal news publisher called ALM, American Legal Media, it stands for, but then they're known as by ALM. So they publish American Lawyer, have you heard of that? And a bunch of other states as well as localities. Newspapers tend to all be ALM publications, and they have an exclusive arrangement with Lexis. So if you want ALM stuff, especially the New York Law Journal, at least for those of us staying in New York. By the way, I never asked you, who here thinks they will stay in New York to practice? Okay, looks like everybody. Anybody not? Or anybody planning to leave New York? Okay. Good to know, because I will then focus mostly on New York, but I will talk about researching other states, but we really will then dive very much into New York materials. So then you definitely want to know about Lexis, because if you want to search the New York Law Journal, in fact, the archives of the New York Law Journal, their website is horrible. It's great because it's got great material, but it's horrible to find stuff. And actually, after a while, they tell you, just go to Lexis to search our archives. So that is definitely one difference. So if you wanted to search legal news, either the New York Law Journal or anything else, a couple of different ways you can do it on Lexis. And this, by the way, is true for any publication, so it also would have been true for American Law Reports and New York Jurisprudence. You just, in this box up here, type in the resource you want to search. And as you can see, Lexis starts to narrow it down, the predictive searching that you see on Google and everywhere else. And so if we wanted New York Law Journal, here it would be. If it was New York Jurisprudence, again, just type it in the box like that. And that works on Westlaw as well. The other way, and you'll notice I've created a favorite because I search the New York Law Journal a lot. Other way to go is just to do your search, again, like we did with other secondary sources. And let's take a look at, since we're interested in this whole ERISA preemption question. And I'm searching everything now. Again, we see the standard. And scrolling down, we'll actually see a category for legal news, which if I recall correctly, Shane, that's what you said you did last time? So sure enough, we see something from State Tax Notes magazine. We're not really interested in taxes. I could limit further by jurisdiction to get down to New York, or just scan through here. So that's another way to search legal news. But as you can see that the legal news that you wind up getting is pretty far afield in terms of the types of publications that are covered. So you can see what it would look like if I did choose New York. And this may change how this is going to look once Lexis changes its look in March. And we'll take a look, once they do change over, we'll take a look and see how it all looks differently then. But for now, if I wanted to search the New York Law Journal, you'll notice I hit New York Law Journal, Lexis added it as a filter, and then type in search, which actually Lexis probably remembers. And check this out, HMO liability, part 3, which suggests there's a part 1 and 2 that I probably will want to read, right? ERISA preemption. I mean, that was as our search terms, so that looks like that's going to give us a sense. And it's a New York Law Journal. But of course, I want to be bibliographically aware, right? 1997. Okay, looks great. Maybe not as great, like I said before. I'm still probably going to read it, but I'm going to know that this may not be up to date, and it may have changed either drastically or minimally or somewhere not at all, somewhere in between. But I do want to be aware. And if I really wanted to, I could sort by newest to oldest. I don't love this, especially on Lexis, because it brings up stuff that's not especially relevant, but the option is there. And sometimes it works great, so it could be worth a try. And let's scroll down. I might just scroll quickly to see if there is anything more recent. No headline isn't exactly telling me very much. But, oh, here's something from 2012. Rejected insurers' claim against healthcare providers. Okay, so that 2012. I would check them both out still, but again, being aware of the possibility, especially that 1997 one, of being very out of date. So, a question about legal news. And again, in terms of when I would be looking at legal news versus encyclopedias and treatises and primary sources, it kind of depends on the issue. I would look at current awareness and legal news at some point. I may wait till the end. Sometimes you want to just understand what on earth it is you're looking at, understand all the issues, and then say, okay, now I get exactly what it is I need to know. I've done my research. I have a sense of what's going on. Let me look at current awareness to see if there's anything new. So this might be something you save till the end of the process as well. Okay, one thing I definitely wouldn't save to the end of the process, which may or may not be lumped in current awareness, but since we're searching the web, this is where I'm lumping it, and that is research guides. And I have to tell you, I'm getting more and more convinced that this is worth the time. Now, you may not find anything, and again, don't spend 2 hours looking for a research guide and not find anything. Spend a little bit of time. And the reason for that is that it answers a variety of questions that came up in some of the screencast questions you had, and thereby serves a purpose. The research guides may be a wonderful way for you to shortcut some of what I've been talking about today, and that is finding useful resources. The research guide does that for its subject. So I did a Google search, as you can see, ERISA law research guides. And I use the word law because ERISA might come up in other contexts like healthcare that don't have to do with the law, and of course, we want the law. And again, I'm on the web, so I want to be bibliographically aware of what I'm looking at. So when I see a .edu site, I know that's educational. So I know this is probably a research guide put together by someone who's good at research, possibly a librarian, not necessarily. Typically, when you see library guides, that's probably who it is. But again, this is somebody who doesn't have something to sell you. So I'm going to think, okay, that might be worth looking at. So we just see a bunch of different schools research guides here. So I might take a look just randomly at Georgetown, the one JMLS. I don't know what that stands for, but it's probably a good school to check out as well. And so here I'm getting references to treatises. So we're getting a little ahead of ourselves in talking about treatises, but somebody had asked in the screencast, how do I find a good treatise or reference to a good treatise? Research guide is one answer. And you might get, you'll see here, look, on our employee, now this is employee benefits generally, so it's not that specific. So maybe this isn't quite exactly what we want, but we notice, oh, look, ERISA, Principles of Employee Benefit Law, another treatise. We have primary law, we have secondary sources. Again, this employee benefits is a little broader than we might like. Oh, look, here's a reference, treatises, ERISA, research guide. Again, Google search, didn't cost us anything. Here's one, ERISA research guide, case law research. Now, that's way ahead of ourselves, but again, the research, you find a good research guide, it could shortcut this whole process, and that's always a good thing. the other thing I would point out so actually it's interesting. I added the word guides, which is perfectly fine, but if I take it away, it's going to change our results a little bit. So probably, so we still see that Georgetown guide, but what I now also see, because it's not narrowed to the guide, is a reference here to dol.gov. Again, being aware of the websites, .gov is government, so again, nothing to sell. Now you may have your various opinions on the value of government, but you know at least they're not trying to sell you something. And this DOL, Department of Labor, as we can see. So we're going to get, again, some background onto ERISA put out by the government, so we at least know the source and know that it should be fairly reliable, at least from a substance standpoint. And again, just from our Google search, but narrow our Google search not just on our issue, but having to do with research. We see down here, Issue Brief, Employee Benefit Research Institute. Okay, again, we don't know who that is yet, so we may want to investigate them, but an issue brief might be a good thing. That's a PDF. So ERISA preemption, implications for health reform and coverage. Okay, we're not so worried about implications of health reform, but it may give us some background as to this whole ERISA, what ERISA preemption is and what we need to be thinking about. Again, we still don't know what EBRI is. So what I might do is back up here to the basic web address, ebri.org. Okay, so .org tells me it's non-commercial. And I might investigate EBRI. And again, getting a sense of how reliable, what the viewpoint is of the particular group that's putting together this website. So I might investigate the about. I would take a look and see what they link to, what they have. I mean, have a bibliography, and just sort of get a sense of the group. Look at what they are focusing on in media. Again, you might get a sense of, do they have a particular political, philosophical viewpoint that you need to be aware of. So that's looking for research guides specifically, as well as just research generally to, again, totally free on Google, give you some background, perhaps shortcut the research process by giving you some recommendations for good sources. More in the very strictly current awareness area that librarians like to talk about is a source, really a publisher, called BNA. Anybody hear of BNA? BNA, back in the old days before the web, put together newsletters that would come out every week on a variety of different topics. So we are now, these days BNA is online. BNA is also now owned by Bloomberg. So what we are looking at now is also available on Bloomberg Law. Right now, Bloomberg is keeping it on both platforms, what's called native BNA platform, which we'll see in just a second. And it's also, as I said, on Bloomberg Law. We will look at it on Bloomberg Law as well. But let's start on the native BNA platform. Bloomberg bought BNA a year or two ago, so this process is happening gradually. I imagine at some point, Bloomberg will decide not to spend the money and merge the two. But I've just been assured by our BNA rep that they have no plans to do that in the immediate future. Why do you care about all this inside baseball stuff of publishers? Because this is what you're going to encounter. You're going to find BNA publications looking very different on Bloomberg and wonder, is that the same as what I'm looking at? Some people develop a preference for one to the other. There are still some things that are on the native BNA platform that aren't yet transferred over to Bloomberg. So there are a lot of different reasons. So to get to the native BNA platform, here on the library homepage, I'm going to click on under online resources. I'm going to click on topic list. And you'll see on the left here, we have BNA. And that's going to give us general information. I'm going to look at the list of products by subject tab. You'll get a sense of the different subjects that BNA published its old print newsletter and now has it available online. And one of them turns out to be healthcare. Just scroll back up so you see healthcare. And when you see a resource center, that's bringing all of their health care materials together in one resource center. So I'm going to click on that. Now what you see here is what's called an authentication screen. Basically, we, the library, pay for BNA. It's a fabulous resource, and we make it available to you. And since people like to do their research all over the planet, we, the library, make it available to you whether you're here on campus and coming from a Hofstra IP address, so in other words, a Hofstra web address, or if you're off-site, we have to let BNA, hey, you're a legitimate Hofstra person, so we're going to authenticate you. And you do this through this screen here. And what this is asking for is obviously your name and your 700 number. Just going to make sure. Keep your fingers crossed. Yay, we made it in. So that should work for you all as well. We are, even though we are here at Hofstra, it's asking us to authenticate as if we are remote because we're on the wireless. And it's just how the Hofstra network works. One of you in the screencast had asked what materials you have available to you after you graduate. And the answer is you're always welcome to come to the library. If you're in the area, it sounds like you're staying in New York, but maybe local. Unfortunately, once you graduate, you will no longer have remote access. Obviously, you can still come to the library and use whatever resources we have accessible through the library. The exceptions to that are Lexis and Westlaw. And all of this, by the way, is contractually through our license agreement. So when we agree, when we sign the contract with Lexis and Westlaw, they say you cannot give passwords out to alum, which is unfortunate because we love to, of course, but we cannot. But with BNA, anybody coming into the library is welcome to use our resources. Unfortunately, we can no longer give you remote access. That's why we ask you for your 700 number. So that is how you would authenticate remotely to BNA. And here you see the Resource Center. And as I mentioned, BNA used to, the print days, send out once a week what they call their current reports. So what's going on in the world of healthcare law. Now, of course, it's online with a lot of different aspects to it. You can see by these different tabs. And the nice thing, of course, one of the nice things about it being available online is you really don't have to worry about which tab to choose unless you really want to narrow down. But right now, I don't really know enough about our area to narrow it down. I just want to see in the healthcare world what is going on with this whole HMO liability and preemption stuff. So you can see I already typed that in. And this is just going to search across the Health Law Center. And what comes back are a whole bunch of different types of documents within BNA. And of course, if you haven't used BNA before, you have no clue what most of these are. So the best way to find out is just to investigate a little bit. So one of the aspects of BNA that you don't know about yet, but are really worthwhile are portfolios. Analysis and guides and treatises are also good. Obviously, you know what cases are, and we'll be talking about all these other types of documents later in the semester. Since you may not have seen portfolios, let's check out portfolios. And so I clicked on portfolios. Seems like my only choice are health law and business. Well, we want health law, so that's good. So I click on the plus sign. And we're mostly interested, right, in health insurance benefits. And these numbers just tell me how many hits, really. So you can see under health insurance benefits, we had managed care contracting, advising the managed care organization. Remember managed care? We learned that term from our ALR article, managed care. HMO is one type of managed care. Advising the provider. So here are a couple of possibilities. Let's just dive into one of them so you can see what a portfolio looks like, at least online. So managed care organization, MCO, so sponsor agreement, impact of ERISA, liability generally, effect of ERISA on MCO, managed care organization liability. So this is very detailed, very practitioner oriented. It's going to give us citations again to ERISA, you can see citations to cases. These tend to be updated quite frequently, although we don't see a date, so it's something to be aware of. Practitioners get to know, if they are practicing, and it tends to be in more of an administrative area like healthcare law, practitioners will use BNA a lot. If there's a BNA subject area in their area of practice. The tax practitioners swear by BNA portfolios. A lot of healthcare practitioners use this area that we're looking at. You saw on that list there are a whole lot of others. Labor law, that's another very heavily used publication for people who practice in the labor law area. So again, very much detailed, very much specialty oriented. Any questions about at least taking a look at BNA? I know we didn't take a look at many of the different types of publications, but remember those portfolios, even though it's a weird word, can be very useful. Obviously, analysis is always a good thing, and guides, also a good thing. Okay, if that is the case, it's time for you to get your hands on a little bit. I've been talking long enough. So we're going to start with the workshop, and I'll wander around and see how you all are doing. If you remember last time, if you take one and pass it around, and I'll talk about what we'll be doing. They're basically just 3 questions on some of these current awareness sources that I just talked about. So I'm going to ask you to put your name on the paper. I'll ask you to hand it back in when we're done. Again, it's not graded. Just want to see what you've done. A lot of times what I see is people who get confused or make a mistake, and then that helps me address it in next class after I've had an opportunity to review it. So that's why I'm asking you to pass it back to me. I had asked you last time to think about an issue of interest that maybe you were writing a paper for in another class, or that you're just interested in, or perhaps you are working in a law firm or elsewhere, part-time. So I want you to think about, write down whatever topic that is and whatever issue that is. You'll use this a few times across the semester, hopefully if it works, for various workshops. And again, I have you do this rather than just my coming up with a random issue for you to research in the hopes that maybe it's more interesting for you. If you're having difficulty finding a topic, let me know and I'll come by and we'll chat and see what we can figure out. But basically, I'm going to ask you to go on Lexis and to search the New York Law Journal. And you remember you can go to the New York Law Journal a couple of different ways. So I'm going to ask you what you searched. I'm going to ask you your title that you found. If you did go to the legal news category and looked at, actually you can look at the New York Law Journal, or you can look at another legal news publication. If you go the legal news route, that's fine too, and just whatever the date is. Then find a research guide. Remember the search, I did ERISA law research guide, or just ERISA law research. You can try it either way. And then just go to BNA like I just did and find the closest subject you can. Some of you aren't going to find anything so great, so be creative. And again, if you have difficulty, that's why I kind of like this square shape. It allows me to walk around and help you out. Any questions? So this is an in-class or in-room workshop instead of wandering down the stairs. We've had our exercise already for the day. And we'll spend a few minutes on this. Yeah, question?
Oh, no, not like for the class.
Oh, yeah. I'm just going to pause our recording because that way, if you do get to the Law Library's homepage, it's fine. Some of you went directly to online resources. I'm going to go the slightly slower way so you make sure you see how to go. So here in the Law Library's homepage, I'm going to go to Topic List. And then on the left here, I'll see BNA. And what that brings me to are BNA titles. I think some of you got here and then clicked on Search BNA. Is that what happened? Yeah. Which is fine, but then you search all of BNA, which might be good for some of you who don't find a particular topic. So actually, Erica, Chelsea, this might have been good for you. Talk to Erica too about topic finding. Anyway, this might have been good for you to search generally, or you can go to this other tab, and this is where I think folks got confused, the list of products by subject. If I had my way, this would be the one that came up when you first clicked on BNA, but obviously I didn't get my way. And here you see the subject list. So it might be easy. Some of you, for instance, let's see. So obviously, if you're interested in tax, there's tax. Whoops. Securities. Crystal, I guess you were interested in securities, so that's pretty obvious. If it wasn't so obvious, I might actually go back to that first tab and maybe try animal law or education law if you're not finding it in the list. And honestly, BNA is like every single other resource. Sometimes it's going to be great, and sometimes it's not going to be very good at all, but good to know about. Any questions before we move on to treatises? As I suspected, we're not going to get very far into treatises, so we will continue next time, but let's get started. Since you already viewed the treatises screencast, you already have a start, so we already know that it's much more in depth. One of the questions in the screencast questions that one of you mentioned is, of course, when would I want to check a treatise, and how would I find a good treatise? And these are all excellent, excellent questions. As the description of being more in depth might suggest, is going to go to a treatise when you've got more of a complex issue. I think our ERISA preemption issue is a great example. We know that we need to know something about it, and we know this is only one part of our whole larger question for our client in terms of finding our HMO liable, whether we can sue in state court, do we sue in federal court, even if we figure out the ERISA preemption question and we determine, all right, no, we got to go to federal court, what do we want to do in federal court? There's a whole lot of questions going on here, so I'm probably going to want to track down an expert in the field and go into some amount of depth having to do with healthcare law, having to do, now we know the term managed care law, all these different terms that we're going to use to hopefully find some good treatises, because we definitely need more in-depth help. If I'm working for a law firm and they just find me a quick and dirty, quick case on this particular real estate question, and I mentioned real estate only because last year I had a student who worked for a firm, and that's what the firm did, and most of her research was quick and dirty, so Google worked for her a lot of the time. But she still wanted to learn how to do more in-depth research, so she took the class. But anyway, there's an example of when you may not even bother with treatises if it's a quick and dirty search. How to find good treatises. We talked about that, the research guides. Haven't looked at the research guides that you found for the workshop yet. What we saw in the example for ERISA, there are a lot of references to research guides. The other way to go from a research guide perspective is at, where am I going here? What I hope is your favorite law school library webpage. You will find research guides. You can actually search for them here. The other way to go here at the law school, and most law schools have on their web pages have research guides. So obviously here at Hofstra we don't have a research guide in every topic imaginable, so you might try other law schools. So for instance, I happen to know, and if you know this, great, if not, just see if you can Google it, I happen to know NYU has an LLM in tax. So I'm going to guess, all right, NYU probably has some interesting, has a lot of guidance on tax. So I might check the NYU Law Library research guides to see if they have some tax research guides. But okay, here at Hofstra, so we have here research and instructions, so I go to research guides, and again, you can use that search on the front page too. And so you see our list of research guides that we have. So I might take a look at those. Believe it or not, I would call a librarian. One thing, we answer a lot of questions, so I have in my head, and you could, if somebody asks me, I don't know anything about copyright, what should I do? The first word, and probably the only word I'll say, is NIMR. NIMR on copyright is the leading treatise in copyright law. There are other good treatises too, but NIMR is the first one that just about any librarian is going to tell you, and any practitioner is going to tell you. So by all means, that's one aspect. Wherever you are on the planet, if you have access to a phone or a computer for email, you can contact us, and we'll be happy to help you at the reference desk. And obviously, I imagine that would be true even if you don't call Hofstra. If you're somewhere else, we're always happy to help folks. That's what we do for a living. So seriously, academic law library in your area. Ask somebody who knows, whether it's a librarian or a practitioner in the field. There's absolutely nothing wrong. If you go into a partner's office, if you go into your supervisor's office and they give you, hey, here's this ERISA question. ERISA, what on earth is ERISA? Nothing wrong with saying, do you know of any good resources, any good treatises where I might start? Now, they might say, no, that's what I'm asking you to do. Or they may say, oh, yeah, go ahead and check. Fill in the blank. So asking questions is a good thing. Okay, couple of other places to look. And again, this was one of the screencast questions, so those are all great. Keep them coming. And that is other databases. We're going to look at Lexis, Westlaw, and Bloomberg in just a little bit. If we get to it today, if not, then next time. But there are other legal and non-legal databases that are worth knowing about. So again, starting here on the home page, and again, I'm going to go down to our topic list under online resources. And I might either go into one of the topics, which is what we'll do in a moment for one database, but I'm going to start here on the left. There's something called CCH IntelliConnect. CCH is a legal publisher. They publish what, again, in the old pre-online days were called loose leaves, and we'll talk a lot about loose leaves because practitioners still use them both in print and there's loose leaves now put online. Of course, they're not loose leaves anymore because they're not in pre-ring binders online. But CCH IntelliConnect is a very important or worthwhile database in which you will find lots of loose leaf treatises. Loose leaf is just one type of treatise. Again, we'll go into details on what loose leaves do for us that's different than other treatises later on in the semester. But for now, so you can take a look at CCH is one of them. And you can see the different topics here. And actually, when we talk about loose leaves, we'll take a look at CCH a little bit more in depth. But again, you can find your various topics to search here. CCH is very popular, probably most popular again for tax. Also, you can see some of the securities, actually. That would be another place. If you had a securities question, that as a reference librarian, I would be sending you to the CCH Federal Securities Law Reporter, which is online on CCH IntelliConnect, and other areas as well. Another database. That's not what I wanted to do. All right, let's go back to the Law Library homepage. Another database I would send you to for treatises is called RIA. RIA is tax-specific tax a lot of resources because it's a pretty involved subject. But you can see, also to give you a sense of what, we've gone to specific databases because I've directed you there, BNA, CCH, but of course if you just wanted a general subject listing because you weren't sure of a particular database, we take a look at our subject listing here. Here's tax. And RIA, as I mentioned, that has some useful treatises on tax. So again, I know it doesn't seem like anybody who's particularly interested in tax in this room. Is that correct? Not anybody who's been? Oh, okay. So you want to know about RIA. You see editorial materials, and then WGNL is just a name of a publisher. Warren, Gorham, and Lamont. You don't need to know that. Just know you don't have to worry about that WGL. But here are treatises. So here would be another place you would find treatises, and you can actually look at the specific ones listed there. So that would be another place to find treatises. Okay, let's move on to Lexis and Westlaw, because probably, and Bloomberg, I'm not sure we'll get there, we'll see how that goes. But that probably is where you'll be looking most frequently for treatises. So actually, let's start on Lexis. I'm just going back to my Lexis tab, and we'll go back to our entry screen, our home screen. And again, a bunch of different ways to find treatises. Actually, the same way we would find any other secondary source. If you happen to know the name of the treatise, you can just type it in the red search box. So I mentioned Nimmer, and if I spell it right, Nimmer on copyright would come up. So if you know the name of the treatise, you don't even necessarily have to know the name. You could guess, like one of the areas we think might be useful for our ERISA question is healthcare, right? So I can type in the word healthcare, and I can see what comes up on the ad source as filter. So sort of a see if you get lucky approach. And sure enough, healthcare law practical guide. So I could search just that treatise on Lexis without having known its title in advance. And of course, another way, not the other way, I can search and browse sources. Again, this will change. I mean, this will still be available in March when Lexis changes, but it'll actually be easier because we'll see that sort of source breakdown like we see on Westlaw. So just like we see all of this, it'll look kind of the same on Lexis with these different types of materials as well as jurisdictional choices right up front on the front screen. But for now on Lexis, we can go to Browse, go to Sources, or we can go to Topics. So we can go to Sources by practice area and find material and narrow our search that way. We can go to Topics and narrow it that way. And of course, we can always just do a search. So we look for HMO liability. And we narrow to secondary materials. And again, unless you're this would probably be the first way I go. If I don't know a specific source, like Nimmer is the place I have to go. But I do want to look for a treatise. I would go to secondary materials. And then instead of narrowing by jurisprudence, which is what we did before, I take a look at treatises. Because I know I want more in depth. My question either isn't being answered by the encyclopedias, or I've gotten as far as I can in terms of what I can learn from an encyclopedia or ALR, and I really need something more in depth, which I think is probably is the case for our question for our client. And then I'd start to take a look and see medical malpractice. Okay, I'm HMO liability, and I would scroll down and see what looks promising. Personal injury, actions defend, vicarious liability of an MCO. Remember what we learned from our search, managed care organization. I might look at that. And what I want to show you is a very important aspect of using treatises whatever source you're in. And actually this applies whether you're online or in print. And remember, I referred back to the question, the screencast question, how do I know that a treatise is worth looking at without having to read the whole thing? Which is totally an excellent question. And my answer, anybody remember my answer? Table of contents, actually. Excellent. I love the table of contents. I love the table of contents in just about any resource. I will almost always look at a table of contents at some point when I'm looking at a resource, if it has one. Remember, not all resources have tables of contents, only those resources that are organized by subject. So if you think about it, ALR, I don't know if you got a sense of it yet, ALR isn't going to have a table of, the overall set isn't going to have a table of contents because the ALR articles are just randomly put in the volumes. So you can have an article, ALR article about torts, and then one right after it will be about healthcare, and one right after it will be about criminal law, and one right after it will be about constitutional law, and again, I'm making all that up. No subject organization. Within each article, remember we were looking at our ALR, there was a table of contents. So that was great for that specific liability of HMO. So that's a great table of contents, but ALR as a set doesn't have one. Whereas a treatise will. So here, this treatise, it looked like it was talking about, based on quality, vicarious liability, quality of care, and we know that it talked about HMOs because we had that, or MCO, vicarious liability of MCOs based on the master-servant rule. Okay, so I'm going to want to read about this, and I'm going to want to look at the table of contents. Now on Lexis, I can do it a couple of ways. There's this little tab on the left here, where I can see this sort of breadcrumb trail. So here's personal injury actions, and I can see Chapter 94 is managed healthcare organization. So I definitely want to see what Chapter 94 is about. And what Lexis will do, which is a little funky at first till you get used to it, and then actually I've grown to kind of like it, is it will give me the whole set, table of contents. So I can scroll back up to the top here. Whoops. And learn about personal injury. I don't know why it's doing like that, sorry. Personal injury, actions, defenses, and damages. And then it jumped me down to where our Chapter 94 was. So scrolling back down. Managed healthcare. And then I see all the sections. So we just learned the term managed healthcare. So maybe I want to read this section 94.01, understanding the industry. If I'm going to be suing them, I should know about the industry. Direct liability, vicarious, I'm not sure which I want. Well, look at that. We didn't even, we were looking at action based on quality of care, vicarious liability. I'm not even sure if that's relevant to us. I'd have to read the section. But look at this next one. I wouldn't have known it was there unless I looked at the table of contents. Based on denial of treatment. Definitely looking at that. And again, I would not have known that was there unless I either looked at the table of contents or I thought to click on next section, which is kind of random. So I'm probably not going to want to do that a whole lot. But looking at the table of contents, I actually found what seems like a better section, don't know till I read it, by, again, using the table of contents. So as I said, you are hopefully going to get really bored with hearing me talk about how wonderful the table of contents is. If you're really bored, then I've done my job, believe it or not. Okay, so any questions about finding treatises on Lexis and using the table of contents? Okay, let's then go to Westlaw. And by the way, there are other ways, there are a whole lot of ways of finding treatises on all these systems. I'm not going to cover each and every one. So if you just look on Lexis and you discover something called practice pages, that's great. Go for it. I'm highlighting the ways that you're most likely going to go. And I think, well, practice pages won't change. But all right, now that I mentioned it, I have to show it to you, don't I? So you find practice pages. Whoops, that's not where I want you. Under Browse, and here are the practice pages. And again, it's either by jurisdiction or area. So again, you will find materials that way. So you know what? I think I am going to stop here at 7 o'clock. And we will continue with finding treatises on Westlaw and Bloomberg. We will get to, I promise you, next class. Please, please, please make sure to have your Bloomberg access ready to go so you know how to log in, because our workshop next time, you will be going into Bloomberg. Oh, and make sure to check out the screencast. There'll be a new one available by tomorrow morning on restatements. So look at that, and there, I think maybe a couple of you who hadn't done the secondary and treatises screencast, please take a look at those as well. That's really it. Have a good week. I'll see you next Tuesday.
See you next week.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. This is for the go.
No problem.
Oh, yeah, how you doing?
I said them on that email.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too. Oop, you know what? Let's. Most people haven't had a problem. We don't.